I used to say that when I found dance, I found God because I was going to a Christian university when I first took my first dance class. And I felt like there was a part of me that opened up when dance became a part of my life. Emotionally, I was able to release a lot of things that I was holding on to from my childhood. Um, but what I really realize now is that it wasn't that at least for me, it wasn't that I found God. It was just that I was able to heal in a lot of ways that I was previously unable to heal in. Dance gave me that voice to do that, and so I look at dance as a way of speaking for humanity in a sense. And so my journey with dance is very much that trajectory of like trying to use dance as a way of healing the world around me because dance was my healing outlet at one point and still is in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What did that feel like, that healing process?
Oh, it was painful. It was so painful, but also relieving. I remember this one moment very specifically. I was walking on my campus, and I just stopped and just started crying. All these things were happening at once emotionally, and I was just like, "What's going on?" And so I just burst into tears in rehearsal, and then walking away from rehearsal, I burst into tears again because I realized I was just releasing a lot of pain from my childhood that I didn't even realize I was holding on to. And yeah, it was painful, but it was also very relieving because it allowed me to free up space in my heart and in my mind to accept whatever future was gonna become mine, you know.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel like the creative dance mindset helped you work through that?
I always felt like I wanted to do something creative. I didn't know what the creative outlet was going to be until I saw dance for the first time, and it was a light bulb moment for me. And um, it was like about a year after taking my first dance class that I started understanding or realizing that there was another aspect of dance, which is choreography, that I could also take on as a creative outlet. And it was in that moment that I realized, like, wow, I can actually speak about the issues that are close to my heart through this creative outlet of choreography, because I can't do that as a dancer. I can only use dance as a way of telling a story that someone else has already written and try to input my own ideas into that movement. But there is no freedom, complete freedom in expression because you're still held captive to someone else's ideas. And then I discovered choreography and I was like, wow, like that opens up every wall and every window, every door. And I can actually dive into aspects of things that are dear to me that I wouldn't be allowed to talk about in someone else's movement. You can really change a lot with art. Art has more power than we give it, than we allow it to have. And especially in today's society, especially in America, we treat it much more like a hobby rather than like than an actual job. And I find that very ironic, given that we also love social media so much and social media is inundated with creative outlets. But we look at it still to this day as something that's, you know, a plaything, you know, and unless you reach this certain tier within art and your creative outlet, you don't get certain accolades. You're not looked at as valuable. You're looked at as a normal person who is just still playing and figuring out who they are. So yeah, for me, the creative outlet really, like discovering that creative outlet for myself really opened up a lot of realizations and the strength that the creative outlet could provide, not only for myself, but for the world around me.
What do you think that line is? Because I've feel like I've run into some people who are like, art, creative expression through art is kind of selfish, but then I've met other people who are kind of more the opinion of working through your own issues helps other people, you know, who are witnessing it work through similar issues. What do you think about that? The self-expression versus the universal themes and things like that.
Well, so I mean, you've used the word selfish for describing people who like some people who use art. What I've discovered is that even with people like me who want to use art to make it more of a healing thing for the world around them, to help other people release whatever that they hold on to. It's still there's always going to be a bit of selfishness in that, because even with me, like the work that I do is also for myself. Like I'm speaking from a personal experience, and in doing so, I am helping to heal myself with the hope that it can also heal somebody else. And you can trick yourself in the process and make yourself believe that it's totally unselfish, it's totally for the public, it's totally against anything dealing with yourself. And because I did that for a while, I completely tricked myself into thinking that it was all about helping everyone around me. And I had to realize that I couldn't allow that to just be the only answer. I had to realize that like it also had to be about healing myself, because if I can't heal myself with my own work, then how am I going to heal somebody else? You have to throw yourself into the work that you're creating in order for it to have the purpose that you want it to have.
Yeah, I kind of have come to the realization, for me, it's like people tear down things and call people selfish because they're not happy with what they're doing. It's almost like people don't want to believe that you can enjoy what you're doing
Yeah.
and have it be a good thing.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's because, like I said before, there's such a negative connotation with the word selfish itself. I've realized that some things are just not as negative as we make them to be. There is a negative aspect of it, yes, and that only depends on how we use it, not necessarily the word itself, So yeah, there's nothing wrong with being selfish in your art in terms of how you're trying to utilize your art through yourself to help someone else. There is something wrong with being selfish in your art if you're only creating art for yourself and not to help the world around you. And some people might not agree. It's subjective. But art, as they say, is also subjective. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get a good response, also it tells you that people are appreciating what you're doing.
Yeah.
How much of that has played into what you've worked on in the past, kind of working with others, getting feedback, that process?
Wow, I've never actually thought about that. How has other people's reactions to my work played into how I create? This is that selfish thing. Because at some point you have to realize that you can't create work solely for the purpose of people accepting it. You have to create work solely for the purpose of it needing to be created. Yeah. Of course you want people to love your work. Of course you want them to have good reactions to your work. But if your only reason is for that, then it's going to be a very hard journey for any creative person. Because you're never going to get enough accolades. You're never going to get enough praise. You're never going to get enough acceptance with that mindset, I had to let go of that a long time ago, because that was the beginning of my journey when I first started dancing. It was like, I want my teachers to like how I progress. I want them to love what I'm doing, the way I'm dancing, the way I'm moving, like my quality, the texture. And I learned oddly enough, I learned very early on in my dance career, like in my training in itself, that I can't rely on that solely. I have to be confident enough within my own abilities. And that's a continued journey for me, is being confident in my own abilities. I still downplay myself a lot, and that's something I'm waking up to consciously right now and accepting, so that I can then heal from it. But I did learn early on that it couldn't just solely be for people's acceptance and approval. Yeah.
I think that's healthy.
Yeah.
Could you explain the process of coming up with an idea, choosing the idea that speaks to you, and then putting it into choreography?
For me, it all depends on the subject matter that I'm discussing. So I'll go with the project that I'm doing right now. One of the projects I'm doing right now is a trilogy film series. Well, it's been expanded further beyond the trilogy film series now. It's now a 5-part series that I'm trying to work on. And it's all about the African American experience. And that came about during the 2016 election and continued to grow in development, especially during the 2020 pandemic and the police brutality and the what seemed to become a race riot of sorts. When I tend to create work, when I tend to pull from subject matter, it starts from me observing the world around me, and then looking at what's happening and seeing how those things relate to our history as a society, and seeing where those parallels come and how we can try to fix those so that they don't persist into the future. So the film that I'm creating, I've done research. The first installment is called These Waters Bleed Deep. It's already been created. It premiered in LA in 2021, August of 2021. And what I did was use those hard moments of current and present history to research our past and see how these things still parallel each other and how it can persist into the future and what can we do to stop it. And so that's when I created These Waters Bleed Deep to talk about the psychological and physical effects of the Middle Passage that's going to lead into slavery, that's going to then lead into colorism, that's going to then lead into respectability politics. And when this film is complete, we will have a full spectrum of what's been going on within the African American community and within America itself, dealing with race and politics and policing. And hopefully that will open a conversation that will be honest and pure, and everyone can have a viewpoint. So we have to think about how we as a country, how we as a society, how we as a world continue these patterns from generation to generation, and how when will it stop? How can we stop it? Well, it starts with the conversations. And so that's when I create work, I create it on that spectrum of like, where is it now? How did it start? And where will it be in the future if we don't do anything about it?
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the really cool things about what you're doing is it's so much more than just movement and aesthetics. It's like there's a deep message there.
Yeah. I really try to, as I said before, like it is personal, and I'm pulling from personal experiences, and there's the selfish part of it, but I do really want it to become something that can change the world around me. Like I don't want to walk through this world having a gift to give and not give it. You know, having the opportunity to influence something and don't.
I feel like art has a power to something like as visceral, as it's like you see things happening with dance, and I think it can unlock certain things that maybe just talking, people don't want to listen to the words, but the experience maybe hits something deeper.
Most definitely. And that's why I love this art form so much. Like I said before, like it, for me, brought out so much healing that I didn't even know I needed. And it was because of the movement. Physicality can do so much for the emotional being, and it can be so beautiful, and it can also be very dangerous, very dangerous. And that's why I feel within previous civilizations, they were very, very protective of the dance art form in itself, of any art form in general, but the dance art form specifically. That's why they were very protective of it, like having to make sure that everything said what they wanted it to say, as opposed to like letting somebody freely express, because they knew just the amount of danger it could possess, just as much as the amount of good it could possess. It's very much like the human. We all have good and bad in us. Dance can also not just dance, but the physicality of movement can do so much for, like I said before, the emotional being. And you're absolutely right. There's such a depth to it. When you look at other civilizations, you take the African civilization, for example, or take the Native American civilization, for example. There are deep ties to the use of dance and connection to spirituality, and how that transitions into the human being. It's so clear. It's a clear depiction of the power that art and dance has. When you look in the Bible, the art form that they try to shun the most, dance. You can't dance. You can't be too sexual. It can't be too provocative. It can't be too this or that. So don't really dance at all, really. If you do dance, you have to wear something that completely covers your entire body. There's the human body, when it's being extremely physical, it has such a power to it. Is basically what I'm getting to. And when you attach that to a message that speaks to the human experience, it can have such a beautiful outcome. And that's why I chose this art form. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people, it's kind of a theme of modern society in some ways. It's like a disconnection from your body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like if you're not a dancer, why would I ever even try to dance?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a lot of that line of thinking
There
when it's
is.
something anyone can
Yeah.
participate in and gain, you
Yeah.
know, like you're saying, it's like can be a cathartic movement.
That's very true. I've taught a lot of non-dancers. Like I teach ballet classes, dance classes sometimes, and a lot of the people I've taught have been non-dancers, and that's their number one excuse for not dancing. Like, I'm not a trained dancer. I don't know how to. And my response to them is always, you are a dancer. Never say that you're not a dancer. Anybody can dance. You don't have to be a trained dancer. You don't have to be a ballet dancer. You don't have to be a modern dancer. You don't have to be a Latin dancer. You don't have to be a tap dancer or a jazz dancer. You don't have to have any kind of formal training. It's not about being a formal trained dancer. You don't have to be an African dancer. You need to know that your body can move, and that through movement, your voice comes through that in so many ways. Your identity can be expressed through movement. It doesn't have to look like anybody else's. There is no right or wrong way to dance. Once we break ourselves free of that codified technique, once we break ourselves free of that social standard of what dance should look like, we realize that there is no right or wrong way to dance. Your freedom of expression is right in itself. It doesn't have to look like anything specific. Just move. And a lot of the people in older civilizations understood that. Their community dances, although they became codified over time, yes, they didn't begin as codified movements. You know, they began just as a freedom of expression. And it was beautiful. And through that, yes, it became codified to attach movements to certain meanings, not to attach movement to an idea that this is the proper way to look when you move. It was just attach movement to certain spiritual meanings. And that became the codified technique of it. Where we are now, the codified technique is just to look aesthetically pleasing. And that's something I'm trying to break myself of currently. It's like I'm always in the mirror. As you know, they always say dancers are their worst critic. I'm always in the mirror thinking, oh, my arabesque line doesn't look good enough. This doesn't look good enough. My turnout, my feet, my this line, my that line. And I got to a point where I was like, why am I being so harsh on myself? When the purpose of what I'm doing is not to look aesthetically pleasing, is to express the human experience. And yes, I still want to have that nice, beautiful line, but that's not going to be the end goal at the end of the day. I cannot tell you the amount of times where I've watched beautifully technical dancers and have been so bored to death because all they're fixated on is their technique. And I'm like, well, where is the humanity behind what you're doing? Where's the expression? Every human being needs to experience their raw beauty through movement. Because I can tell you, when I first became a dancer, not knowing anything about a dance step, it was the most enjoyable experience in my life. I still remember that feeling of me stepping into my first dance class.
Have you ever had periods where you felt like you kind of were struggling or, you know, feeling doubtful, or how did you get through those periods?
Yeah, I've had several periods like that. I mean, I had one in 2021. I had one in 2020, most definitely in 2020 because that was really hard. And the thing that helped me get through those periods of doubt, of feeling like maybe I'm not in the right place, was going back to the beginning, going back to the origin, and reliving that experience, rediscovering what caused me to want to become a dancer in the first place, and remembering that in that journey, there was never a promise of anything, but there was always an assuredness that I was doing the right thing. I had to let go of this idea that there was a promise of me reaching a certain level of success, that there was a promise of me reaching a certain level of physical expression and success, and just allowing myself to just continue to be and do what I love to do for the purpose I love to do it for. And that has helped me every single time. Because I can tell you right now, like especially in 2020, I was on the verge of absolutely just walking away. It was during the pandemic. Dance was shut down completely. But all around me, bars were opening back up, restaurants were opening back up, malls were opening back up. All these places that were seemingly not good for COVID were opening back up, but dance was continuing to be locked down. We were put on the last tier of reopening, and that hurt me so deeply because I don't view dance as just an entertainment value aspect of art. There's so much, as I've mentioned before, there's so much depth and meaning to dance that ties to humanity, and it's so beautiful. And sorry, I'm getting emotional. There's so much beauty to dance. There's so much beauty to art. And I just want the rest of the world to see the depth of that beauty.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel that this pandemic has caused a shift in how we view art. And I hope that that shift continues to grow. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank you for being vulnerable.
But yeah, it was hard getting through those moments. Very hard, very hard. And I just had to remember to go back to the beginning and start from there. And it's like starting from scratch all over again. And no one wants to start from scratch this late in their career, you know? No one wants to feel like they have to start over. But as artists, we feel like we have to continuously start over, to rediscover, relearn, regrow, you know? And there's a beauty in that as well. Because in humanity, there's always a reemergence. And so if you want your art to emulate what humanity emulates, it also has to have that reemergence. And you have to be open to that. And I'm open to it.
I love watching and seeing how people reinvent themselves. You know, I think that's one of the most interesting things about life is just seeing how people progress, where they end up, you know, what they're doing next. And I love that you always have multiple projects going at once. You know, I love seeing that.
Yeah. I mean, in today's world, as an artist, you have to be very versatile in your art form. No one is looking for the artist that can only do one thing anymore. And why should they? You know, I mean, it's not a bad thing to be an artist that's really good at one thing, because if you're good at that one thing and it's your niche, that's beautiful. But to be an artist that can really be good at multiple things, it makes you more marketable in today's world. Speaking about art for entertainment value, that is a part of the world that we live in, although I don't necessarily agree with it. It is a part of the world that we live in, and it's a part that we have to, you know, navigate. And making yourself as marketable as possible is the better option.
I keep thinking about what you were saying earlier about cultures that had dance integrated into the tradition and things like that. It just seems so different from how society's set up now. It's all very commodified.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the dollar value of your dance? You know, it just seems almost silly thinking back to what it used to be to what it is now.
You're absolutely right, and I think about that all the time, and it really is because of the invention of money and profit. You know, because money wasn't always a thing, but as society progresses, it creates ways of making things worth something that didn't previously have a value, and when that happens, a certain aspect of a soul of something dies. Because yeah, you're right. There was a point in our history where dance didn't have a value on it beyond the expression and the connection with humanity that was placed on it. That was its only value. That was the sole purpose of its value. It wasn't about, well, what can I get from it to purchase something else with? You know, it wasn't about that. Life itself was not like that. You know, there was a value placed on things, not in a monetary sense, but in the sense that, like, how important is this to the experience of life itself, rather than how much wealth can I build with it, you know? And it's kind of sad that we have to associate our friends with value. We have to associate our human connection with value, when there was a time where our value for human connection was just the connection itself and the time spent with each other and the importance of having that time with each other, because we knew that time was fleeting and that one day that time wouldn't exist anymore. It would only be memories. Now we're just like, well, if you want me to spend a certain amount of hours with you, I'll make this much in a day. How much time is that worth? Can I spend this much time with you, or can I just go and do this job that's going to give me this money? And it's very sad to think that way. I would like to go back to the idea of who are you? How are you doing? What's your name? That's valuable, not the profit that can potentially come with spending this much time with you, you know?
So, what would you say to someone who's in the process of trying to find their voice artistically or otherwise?
That is a personal journey, but one thing that has helped me in trying to rediscover or find my voice artistically, what's helped me was going back to my childhood self and rediscovering who I was and who I've become, and finding those differentials and those parallels and sitting with them. For me, there's never been nothing more rewarding than sitting in the entirety of yourself in that present moment. And people don't like to do that. Not many people like to sit with themselves in their entirety. They want to sit with themselves in the idea they've made of themselves. You know, they want to sit with themselves in the things they find pleasurable about themselves. Yeah. But to sit with yourself in your entirety, that means the good and the bad, and just be present in that. It's hard. It's hard because, again, like I said before, no one wants to see themselves as bad. Everyone wants to see themselves as good. And so they eliminate the bad parts of them mentally so they don't have to deal with it. I don't like to do that. I want to know the nitty-gritty of myself. I want to know the horrendous acts I've done. I want to remember those things. I want to remember the horrendous thoughts I've thought. I want to remember all of me in every present moment. And I do that because I want to also look at the people around me and know that I am not better than anyone. We are all the same. And when you do that, I feel when you sit with yourself in your entirety, you really discover the truth of who you are. And from that point of view, you can discover, or you can lay out a path towards who you want to become. I feel like if you leave any part of that out, then anything going beyond that is just a facade. It's not truth. You know, and know that those things will always be ever changing, ever evolving, as you ever change and evolve. There's nothing wrong with changing and evolving over time. It's how you do it that's important. Look at the world around you through the lens that everyone is constantly evolving and that nobody's perfect. If you look at the world around you in that lens, then you will always leave room for growth and forgiveness. And know, in doing so, that not everyone is going to be the depiction of them that you want them to be. And you have to be okay with that. You have to walk away being okay with people not being who you expect them to be. Yeah.